Apache Junction City Council work session. Roll call, please.
Mayor Wilson,
Yes?
Vice Mayor Rizzi. She on the phone. Councilmember Evans. Here. Councilmember Nesser. Present. Councilmember Schroeder. You have a quorum, Your Honor.
Thank you.
That's quick.
There you go.
There it is.
There, now you got it.
I will
Okay,
tomorrow.
agenda,
He's working it.
presentation and discussion of city financial advisory. Matt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. The first item on the agenda tonight is related to pension obligation bonds. Nick Dodd, Managing Director of Piper Sandler, is our financial advisor and is going to give us an overview of the public safety personnel retirement system, its unfunded liability that we have, and how pension obligation bonds could benefit us in the long run. And so he's going to give us a brief overview. You'll see attached to your agenda his presentation, but also a more detailed report that gets into more of the nitty-gritty of the challenges as well as this opportunity. So after he presents, we'll be available for questions. I'll go a little bit over a calendar as well that we're proposing. And Leslie Dresch, our finance director, is also here to answer any questions if you have any of her as well. So Nick, why don't you come on up and we can start the presentation.
Welcome.
Oh, there we go.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. My name is Nick Dodd, and I'm with Piper Sandler. We've worked with the city for a number of years, and it's a pleasure to be here this evening. We've been working with staff for the last month or so to prepare the materials that were included in your package. As Mr. Busby noted, there is a more detailed report that was included in the package, so obviously that would be used as a reference, and there's a number of acronyms that we've tried to identify, but we've got some terminology in there, so obviously as you go through that, feel free to follow up with any questions. So if I can,
Yeah, I can.
Or the arrows?
Yeah, the arrows work.
Perfect.
Yep.
So what we're here tonight to talk about, what we've said is the challenge. And so as you may know, you've probably heard over the years, people talk about PSPRS, which is Public Safety Personnel Retirement System. And about 5 years ago, the state went through some reform, and that was both a voter initiative and some legislation. And as a result of those reforms, Tier 1 and Tier 2 are now what we would refer to as a legacy system. So if you were a police officer for the last 20 years, you would be a Tier 1 or a Tier 2 employee. And if you were hired really after 2017, you would be a Tier 3 employee. And so Tier 1 and Tier 2 are closed. And so that system now has a set number of employees, and as they retire and become retirees, or as the members who are retired pass away, obviously that system will start to wind down. And so one of the things that people have started to look at is what are some things they can do, because that system has been underfunded for a number of years, meaning the value of the assets is significantly below what the forecasted liabilities are. And there's a couple of reasons that the system has kind of gotten out of balance between the assets and liabilities. First of all, people are just living longer. Some of those assumptions that were made a number of years ago haven't played out. People are living longer because of medicine and they're healthier. There were some adjustments made to the Tier 1 and Tier 2 pension system prior to the reforms that were costly. And those costs have been shifted to cities and towns and counties all over the state, such as Apache Junction. The fire district here is an example of, where you would have employees, and some of those costs would have been shifted to that district. And then, frankly, there's been some years where the investment performance at PSPRS was below what was forecasted. And so in their model, they assume you earn 7.3%, and if you don't earn that, then obviously you have to make that up over time. Today, Apache Junction, and you have your own unique, identifiable, it's almost like within this system, there's your own little pension made up of all of your, in your case, just police officers. And so you're funded today at about 40.7%. And that funding ratio means you have a debt or a liability of $26.3 million. And that's as of June 30th, 2021, which is the most recent report available. So that's kind of the challenge. What are some of the opportunities? Well, as I mentioned, with the voter initiatives and some legislation, Tier 1 and Tier 2 have been closed, and now we can accurately identify what that unfunded liability is, and people can start to figure out how to work towards, funding that. Right now, your payments are projected, and you'll see this in a table in just a couple of slides, your payments are projected to go from $2.3 million in the current year to $3.2 million in fiscal 2036. And that $26 million liability is earning basically at a 7.3% interest rate. The city has an opportunity to refinance, if you will, that $26.3 million in the bond market, and you would get kind of current market rates, which have been going up a little bit here recently, which is unfortunate. But our current expectation is right now, interest rates for a transaction of this size, the interest rate would be about 3.5%. So if you compare the 3.5% to the 7.3%, there's obviously savings there because that rate's more than it's more than half of the 7.3. Also, I would note that we would keep the duration of the payments the same, so your payments wouldn't get stretched out. You would pay it off over the same period of time, and not like what you have with PSPRS, which is an increasing payment stream over the next 15 years. You would have like a flat or a level payment stream. The best way I think about it is like your mortgage. You pay the same every month. You would pay the same every year, and right now it's estimated to be about $2.3 million. You would, if you were to move forward with this, you would be 100% funded in Tier 1 and Tier 2. Obviously, they still have to do their job and invest the money and work over the next 15 to 18 years. And each year you would still get the reports in the CAFR that would show your funded status. And then it will move around as investment performance goes up and down. But you would have taken care of the big problem, the $26 million problem. And so then you would still have to manage that as we move forward. And we'll talk a little bit about a strategy around that. So you kind of have two choices. I think the staff's recommendation based on discussions and some of the materials we've reviewed with them would be to move forward and to do a bond and to fund the PSPRS liability and essentially replace that 7.3% payment with the debt service. And just to be clear, when you do that, PSPRS will literally stop sending bills for the UAL portion of your payment, and you'll just pay the normal cost, which is the 12%, like you do an ASRS employee. And you're always going to have normal costs. The way I think about normal costs in the simplest terms, it's like your 401k, right? I fund it every paycheck or whatever. You're always going to have normal costs with the pension system. So the liability component, which is the big piece, will go away, and you'll just be left with normal costs. The other part of the strategy, which we're recommending, and we've talked with staff about, is to set aside or to designate a portion of your general fund balance, and we're recommending it to be 10%, so that would be $2.6 million, and to set it aside as what we call a contingency reserve fund. And the goal of that is to, in those future years, as I mentioned, when PSPRS will make some adjustments and have investment returns. If you have a little bit of an unfunded liability in the future, you could draw on that reserve fund to fund it back up to 100%. And ultimately, if you didn't need it over the next 15 to 17 years, you could take that and apply it to your final year's bond payment, and then the liability would be gone, and the reserve fund could be used, or it could be returned to the general fund. I think it's important to note we are not recommending, and staff didn't want to pursue, including that in the bond issue, which some issuers have chosen to do. So staff would like to set aside some fund balance or cash you guys have for that purpose. The other option you could do is just basically do pay-as-you-go, so you just stay on the path you're on. Your payment stream will continue, and you'll see it in just a second. It would still continue to go up as forecasted. The other thing you could do, some cities have done, is they just take cash every year, like Gilbert, all of their excess cash from all the business development and surplus they've had. They just put cash at it. And I think one year they put $15 million towards it. You know, that's a policy decision. It's similar to pay-as-you-go versus doing bonds. Here's a little bit more, just real quick, on the contingency reserve. So we have recommended the $2.6 million contingency reserve. It would be available to the staff and future councils to help manage your PSPRS UAL. It would not be funded with bond proceeds, and it could be used to pay off the bonds in the final year. So I always tell people I'm a visual learner, so when I see tables or charts, it helps me. And so if on the table, depending on how you're looking at column A, obviously you've got the years, and we're in the current year now, 22. Nothing you can do about it now. We would actually close this at the start of July if you decide to move forward. So we're really talking about fiscal years 23 through 38. Column A, you can see that's the projected payments that come from PSPRS. So based on the current funded status and that $26 million unfunded liability, those are the payments you'll make just associated with that liability over the next 15 to 16 years. The debt service column, that's column B. Think about that as you're replacing column A with column B. So you fund the $26 million, you would give it to PSPRS, and now instead of making payments to PSPRS twice a month when you do your normal payroll, you would just pay off the bond investors who invested in that $26 million. And you can see the payment there is level at $2.23 million every year. The last year is 2038 is kind of a small, weird year. That's just how PSPRS's future payments are projected. And so you can see then if you compare the difference between A and B, you have savings, and obviously because your payment stream was scheduled to go up and your new payment stream would be level, over time you start to recognize pretty significant savings. And you can see in those later years there, you're receiving almost $1 million. It's projected almost $1 million, $800,000, $900,000 in savings in those later years. And so what that also means is you could take some more savings up front today, but what this strategy does is actually pays the debt off quicker, and you kind of defer when the city realizes those savings. So this is actually a more conservative approach, if you will, because you're going to pay that debt down quicker versus letting it just kind of flow upward and just take that interest rate savings. So you would, in fact, pay it off quicker. You can see over the projected 15 to 16 years there, there's $8 million in difference. That's just column A, column B, subtract, and you get the difference. In today's dollars, that's $5.9 million in savings. So when you do a kind of a present value calculation of those numbers, it would be almost $6 million in savings today and $8 million in cash flow savings over the next 15 years. Other communities in the state have done this. A number of communities have done this all over the state. Included in the book is a much more extensive list. It's long. There's a lot of them. The ones that we thought were most relevant for you, kind of some peers or people you'll recognize. Pinal County did almost $89 million middle of last year. Casa Grande did $63 million in September. And then the fire district here in Apache Junction did $29 million earlier this year to fund their liability. All three of those jurisdictions did go to fully funded status as a result of these transactions. When you think about these types of bonds, while there's a lot of good and a lot of potential, benefit, there are risks associated with a pension obligation bond. And to be clear, you would sell a debt and you would take the money and give it to PSPRS, and they would in turn invest it like they do all of their other money they get. And obviously there's some risk there because of the investment return, investment or timing risk, the timing of when you give them that money. The market risk is just how does the market perform relative to the forecast, which is the 7.3. Actuarial risk, when we talk about that, the actuarials are accountants. They work with the system to forecast what they think some of those assumptions are going to be, And just like they've made changes in the past, there's nothing to say in the future they couldn't make other changes. That would affect everyone in the state, not just the city of Apache Junction. And so those actuarial risks are real. They're completely out of your control, as are the market risks. You don't manage the money, PSPRS does. And then funding target, when we talk about that, this is the concept that we said you're going to be fully funded in July if you did this transaction. And then in 2 or 3 years, Leslie stands up and presents the CAFR and you're at 96% funded. We wouldn't want someone to go, hey, I thought we were 100% funded, and the reason you might be at 96% in a couple years or 3 years or whenever it is because of some of those changes. Maybe the market didn't perform. I will tell you, Flagstaff did a very large transaction. They were actually the first one in the state to do it in 2020, and they put the money in with PSPRS in June of 2020. From 2020 to 2021, PSPRS earned 25% return. Flagstaff's 107 or 108% funded today. So it can go both ways. There's upside and downside risks. So when we talk about these risks, and in the book, there's a more detailed slide that kind of goes into much more depth on each of those. Those are the things we're talking about. Once again, things outside of your control, but we think it's important to at least bring them to your attention and then kind of refer to the more detailed report. I think Matt's going to touch on the time schedule a little bit, so I'll kind of go through this and just go to questions and then.
Questions, yes.
So I understand the risk of being underfunded or the market not performing as PSP anticipates, which is kind of why we're in the fix we're in now. Do we have any comfort zone in doing this? I mean, I think I've been waiting for something, because what we've been doing is not enough by any stretch of the imagination. And I mean, to me, especially with the other communities taking the same route, I think it's a good direction for us, but we still don't have any guarantee that what the account does match what we're anticipating. How do you see that?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, and Councilmember Evans, so if you were to move forward with this strategy, the bonds that would be sold are fixed rate. So there's no risk there. Your payment would never change. And so that's a risk you can control.
That's one question.
Yeah. My personal impression is that PSPRS has done better in recent years. There is a lot of new staff there. Actually, a former county manager or assistant county manager, Mike Townsend, is now the executive director. And they have changed some of their investment strategies in recent years. One of the things they did that really hurt them, they invested in real estate heavily before the real estate crash, and that took a long time to, in essence, burn off. And I think they have a money management strategy that's probably a little closer aligned to ASRS, who hasn't had some of those problems over the years. I mean, ASRS has historically been viewed as being pretty well funded on a national level, and so. But it is a risk, and they earned 25% last year from July 1 of 2020 to June 30 of 2021, 25.7%. This year through, I think, end of February or March 1st, they're at about 4%. So they're under the 7.3, but anybody who's got investments right now, I don't know, mine are down, right? They're down from where.
I'd love to get 7% on
Right?
anything right now.
And so I think, pensions are intended to be slightly conservative, and they're probably outperforming the market as a whole. Because if you would have just asked me what's the market down, I probably would have said, it's probably negative, right? And they're still positive for the year. And so I do think they've implemented some changes, and they have new management there who's really been committed and focused to both improving the investment strategy and overall performance, as well as improving the funded status, which they've worked tremendously towards over the last couple of years. A number of folks, I mean, the list is right here. Thanks, Matt. The state put cash in over $1 billion to fund their portion of basically DPS. And so there's a lot of folks looking at this and working towards it, but only time will tell. If, you know, when you do your historical look back, will you know how did they perform? I will tell you too, given the recent success in 2021, their average rate of return is right around 7%, which is really pretty close to the 7.3, but it helps when you have a 25% return in a single year. It brings up your average.
Well, I think it's really important to get rid of the 7% interest that we're paying now. And we've got to do something.
Yeah, maybe Leslie can talk to a little bit why this is an effort to do that something. We've been watching this, the liability just get
Bigger and bigger.
And, you know, as our finance director, it's been, you know, nice to hear, you know, an effort made to potentially save over this period of time
Yeah.
in net present value, $5.8 million, so. That's
Right. There is a significant savings involved in this, and if we're looking at the performance of the PSPRS, we're still subject to their performance with what we pay into their
Right.
fund anyway, but they are being much better monitored, and they're much more in the spotlight than they have been in the past, and I think they're doing a better job, and they'll continue to do a better job. But just like any investment, you have to, this is a long-term investment because it is a retirement investment, and to look at a single year isn't really the way you're supposed to look at it. You're supposed to look at it over time, a 20-year or any, you know, longer time, and they should be able to perform at a good rate over that time, I think. And I think it will benefit us a lot to bring in an annual savings for us that will increase over time. And if you're, you know, one of the things that will change is as we hire new employees and we change new employees, and if they change anything, there are things that are going to change, so we're not going to stay at 100%, but we'll be able to manage that much better if we move forward in this direction.
Well, and with the extra put aside out of the general fund each year, we shouldn't have a big surprise.
right.
And could you explain quickly the AA, the A1, and the A ratings?
Be happy to, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, and Councilmember Evans. So as you can see, most of the folks, so those are the ratings. So a rating agency and the city would actually go out and get rated. You've had very little debt over the years. You borrowed through GATA, which was a state agency, so you actually never had to get your own rating.
We've never done a rating trip, we never had. I'd be interested to find that out ourselves, Nick.
Yeah.
I remember when
did
Queen
audit, we
Creek
did
went
WIPA.
to New York and did their first rating 15-plus years ago, and so the city would have to pursue a rating. And you can see most of these are cities or counties, and most of them have pledged their sales tax revenues, which is what you guys would pledge as well. And you can see most of them are double A. For example, though, City of Tucson, their charter prohibits them from pledging their sales tax. So they had to do a lease structure where they basically put up assets, and it's a weaker credit. And so the credit is weaker. You can see the rating. Single A would be kind of middle of the road. Double A would be higher, and then triple A is the highest rating. You could also see, for example, Superstition Fire District, they don't have sales tax revenues, so they too can only do a lease where they actually, that's really like a mortgage structure, and so it's viewed as a weaker credit. So you could see the fire district was also rated A. Our expectation is that you guys would probably be a AA minus rating, but our hope is that you'll be able to get into the AA category, in part because you've had very little debt for many years, and you've really managed your finances, and we think that when we go through that process, we hope to have a pretty positive outcome, and obviously, we would report that back to the council.
Thank you.
Robert.
Excuse me. That ratings, the A and AA, that is what will determine how much we pay, the interest or something?
The best analogy is it's a credit score.
Okay,
So for us, 800's perfect, that's AAA or whatever 800 is. 700 would be a AA, and 600 might be single A, and so that is a really good analogy. And then, yes, there's a couple of factors drive your cost, how long you borrow for and what your rating is.
okay. I don't really have any questions because I'm not a finance person. Don't ask me to balance a checkbook. But I've got to believe that if all of these cities see the value and that all the people who are experts are going this route, it's something that we need to seriously look at.
Well, excuse me, we'll make a quick comment concerning, it's one of the things that I have been, I would say, very worried about in it because it keeps growing over time, and the obligation is there, and it's something that we've addressed it, but we haven't come up with a way of correcting it, and I think this is something that we can look at as being very positive on how it can come about.
So, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, this is your first introduction to this topic. There's lots of information to share. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to let me know, Leslie know, Bryant know. We can bring Nick back. If we have general consensus about, kind of head nods moving forward and starting to prepare, as it says on this calendar, the initial document preparation, our intent is to bring it back in a month with some of these initial documents for consideration by the council. But starting this week, you can start getting with us more questions as you review the documents further, or if anything comes up that you forgot to ask tonight, we're happy to get you all the information. We want you as well informed as you feel comfortable. So, as you can see, the rest of the calendar there. I don't know if Nick or Leslie want to add anything else about the calendar or timing, but this is the first step, is just to inform you about this proposal.
I'm happy, just high level, we'd come back in a month with the attorneys. They would prepare a big stack of documents. Obviously, it's interest rate sensitive, so until you can see on this schedule, it says you price the bonds. That's when you lock the interest rate. And at that point, you've shifted risk on the fixed rate bonds you would sell to the investors, and you would be locked in. And then we're closing after July 1st for budget authority purposes. But your risk is on the bond side is eliminated when you price the bonds at the end of May.
I just think the sooner the better.
Yeah.
I don't see any reason to hesitate, even though there's just 4 of us sitting up here tonight. I think it's something that we have to move on.
And address.
Okay,
Okay.
we'll keep it
All
going.
right. Thank
Right,
you.
thank you.
Thank you, Nick.
Okay, presentation discussion by Carson, Bise, Rudy.
Your Honor, I'll kick this off. Carson, come on up. Carson has been working through development fee analysis many years for us, but this is a little different. This is a fiscal impact analysis of our Superstition Vistas development, and we had asked him to do this so that we can see just how, over time, how the revenue and expenditures might develop over time. And we'll turn it over to Carson.
Thank you, Brian. Good evening, Mayor, members of council. I'm Carson Bise with TischlerBise. Some of you I've seen before, and I'm going to see you again tomorrow night when we talk about the development fees and the IIP. But a little bit about us. We do specialize in fiscal and economic issues, as well as impact fees and other infrastructure financing issues, and we've done more of that type of work in Arizona than anyone in the country. I think as sort of a preamble to the results that we discuss, I think it's important to distinguish what a fiscal impact analysis is versus economic impact, because a lot of times I see these two terms sort of used interchangeably, but when we talk about fiscal and impact analysis, we're talking about the cash flow to the public sector, meaning the local government, looking at development projects, seeing what the revenue is, and how does that measure against the commensurate expenditures, both on the operating and the capital side. When we talk about economic impact analysis, that's really the cash flow to the private sector. A lot of those economic impacts exceed your jurisdictional boundary. They can be regional in nature. Sometimes, depending on the size of the project, they can be statewide or regional in nature as well. So it's important to make that distinction. It's also important to make the distinction between what it is that we've done as part of this analysis and what your budget and finance folks do on an annual basis. So there's two big hurdles, or not hurdles, but two big differences. One is your municipal budgeting process is a revenue-constrained exercise. So every year, you are estimating revenues, sometimes based on past trends, other revenue sources being estimated based on state formulas. And so once you have that revenue forecast, you then back into what you can afford. So it is a revenue-driven operation. Fiscal analysis is not revenue constrained. We're making a big assumption here, and that is all your levels of service across the board are going to continue going forward, right? And that's not the case in real life, because you walk that budgeting tightrope on a year-to-year basis in terms of what you can afford, and in order to elevate levels of service in one department, you may have to cut them in another. The process we use, we had in-depth conversations with the major city service providers. We call these discussions level of service interviews to get an idea of the department's scope of operation, where there may be fixed costs. And what I mean by fixed cost is that they're not growth related. So for instance, you're going to have a city manager, you're going to have a planning director, regardless of whether there's 1,000 people here or 100,000 people. So those are fixed relative to new development. Variable costs that are affected by new development include things like police officers, your line department folks like planners, building inspectors, budgeting folks, librarians, et cetera. Based on these assumptions, we then developed the model and then prepared the report that we're going to discuss tonight. I'm not going to spend much time on this because I'm sure you guys are aware of the ins and outs of the development units 1 and 2 and the proposed Superstition Vista development proposal, but essentially it's about almost 11,000 housing units and almost 25,500 new residents within the city. In terms of employment and non-residential activity, it's about an additional 443,000 square feet of additional space as a result of development units 1 and 2. So in terms of the methodology, there's really two types of approaches you can use with fiscal analysis. One is the average cost approach, which is somewhat simplistic, but it focuses on per capita and per employee measurements. We try to focus on case study marginal costing wherever we can, and we use those on your line departments that are out there providing services such as police, the libraries, parks, roads, planning and development to a certain extent. We do use an average cost approach for some of the, for lack of a better term, the overhead departments like IT, those kind of functions there in order to measure the growth-related costs. Major assumptions, we use the past fiscal year's budget because that's when we started the process. That budget is used to define the levels of service. We are not modeling inflation as part of this because it makes it very difficult to look out 20 years and really put that into context in today's dollars. As I mentioned, marginal costing is used whenever possible. It also focuses only on the city's tax-supported funds, and that includes general fund, the highway user revenue fund, the development fee funds, as well as the street projects sales tax fund. The capital facility assumptions built into the model is based largely on the infrastructure funding arrangements from the development agreement for Superstition Vistas, Development Unit 1 and 2, where the developer is responsible for providing parks and much of the road improvements. The draft development fees that we're going to discuss tomorrow night were assumed. There are no parks and street development fees per the development agreement, with the exception of residential units are assumed to pay the $800 development fee toward the Ironwood Road debt service. And we also assumed your current funding arrangement, which has the street project sales tax sunsetting in fiscal year 2025. A summary of the capital needs from development units 1 and 2. Based on your current levels of service, about 19,000 square feet of additional library space, about 7,300 square feet of additional police space, about 22,600 square feet of additional general government space. And again, as I mentioned, the developer is assumed to be constructing future road improvements as well as parks. Summary of the results. The way to read this table, we work our way down from the top to the bottom. We show the results for each of these individual funds. The general fund generates a cumulative, that's the cumulative over the 20 years, a net surplus of about $19.3 million. If we look at that on an average annual basis, that's about $968,000 a year. The HERF fund generates a cumulative surplus of $6.2 million, which is about $312,000 a year. And then the capital fund generates a cumulative net surplus of slightly over $1 million, which is about $51,000 a year. And that's to be expected because the impact fees are designed to cover or to offset the growth-related impacts, and so it makes sense that it's fairly close to being revenue neutral. So then when we add these funds together, we see that the project generates a cumulative combined net surplus of about $26.6 million, and that equates to about $1.3 million annually. This shows the results annually by the different funds. This chart sort of highlights the marginal cost approach taken, so that's why the trend lines, we call them lumpy in nature because they're very jagged and versus sort of a straight line going up or a straight line going down, which would happen under an average cost approach. And this reflects the fact that you are building certain facilities in certain years and you're hiring certain staff positions in certain years, and in many years there are multiple staff being hired. In terms of a summary of findings, the net surpluses that are generated are not surprising, given that approximately 48% of the FY21 budget for the general fund is funded through sales and use tax, and development units 1 and 2 add significant population and associated retail spending to the city's economy. By way of example, I think development units 1 and 2 are adding about 80% of your current population base. Also, the city's 2020 median household income is estimated at about $47,000, whereas the estimated household income for development units 1 is almost double that at $96,000 in terms of, and you fall into that assumption by looking at the value of the homes and what you have to meet the mortgage requirements in order to finance a house like that. Another way to look at the results, and a lot of people understand these terms a little better, and that is for every dollar of expenditure, what are we getting in return? And with development units 1 and 2, for every dollar that the city incurs in expenses, you're getting about $1.12 in return in terms of revenue. In addition to the positive fiscal impacts that we've discussed, development units 1 and 2 also have a tremendously positive economic impact, which is the cash flow to the private sector within Apache Junction in the region. And to the extent that the city can be more successful in its economic development efforts, and to the extent you can capture the construction phase as well as that indirect or spin-off and induced activity, it will only improve the city's fiscal position because the services that are supplying the construction and the non-residential activity have to locate somewhere, and to the extent they can locate elsewhere in the city, that's just going to make the results more positive. Superstition Vista Development Unit 1 and 2 is expected to increase the general fund sales tax by approximately 50% at build-out. Our estimates of revenue are actually more than what was projected by the developer's own fiscal analysis, which focused only on the revenue, did not cover the cost side at all. We thought that they were very conservative, particularly what's going on in the internet sales tax, or the internet sales market at this point. Our projection of future sales tax, as I said, is on the conservative side, because we don't know to the extent to which online sales will gain ground on the traditional bricks and mortar retail sales, once, the pandemic-related cycle is over and things sort of shift back to normal, whatever that is in the future. The analysis also illustrates the importance of continuing the city's street project sales tax, which again sunsets in FY 2025. If the street project sales tax did not expire, as we assumed in the model, development units 1 and 2 would generate $13.3 million over the 20-year analysis rather than the $1.2 million that are actually generated because we assumed the sunset. And although annual surpluses are generated, it's important to keep these surpluses in perspective. $1.3 million a year isn't enough to go out and fund a tax break for everybody, right? When we look at what percentage it is of your overall budget, that 20-year annual 1.3 surplus is only about 2.4% of the city's current fiscal year budgeted revenues. The analysis also indicates, in our opinion, that the city should give strong consideration to adopting both a primary property tax and a secondary property tax for debt service. As I mentioned, these net surpluses are rather small when you look at them in terms of the overall budget, and they're not enough to allow, or just enough to allow the city to operate at its current level of service with little buffer to the fiscal externalities that can occur over time. Also, one of the things that we have seen around the country dealing with communities at this stage of development, like Apache Junction, with a large game-changing, and I hate that term game-changer, but that's really what it is, development project. What happens to a lot of these communities is that the new resident that moves to the city will likely have a higher expectation in terms of levels of service, in terms of response time and library collections and the gamut, right, of governmental services. So I think that if you're like most cities we've worked with, you're going to experience an increased pressure and expectation, which will strain you from a fiscal perspective as well. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
I just have one comment.
Sure.
And I totally agree with, as much as it's such an unpopular thing, is our need to start on a property tax analysis of how to do it. And everybody just goes, oh, God, no. But it's a reality. We can't keep doing what we've been doing. Like you said, the expectation is going to be much higher.
Right.
And that is really our only solution, as we're the ones not having one yet.
Robert? No? Okay, well, I got one. Going to your, I'll say, annual net fiscal impact chart.
The slide here?
No, the next one.
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see the capital decrease. Is that because of the tax that we have right now for our roads?
Not really. What happens is the capital is the purple line. So in the middle, like 2027 to 2029, that's where a lot of the construction happens of like a new library branch, new police station, et cetera. What happens toward the end is build out occurs like in year 2014 or excuse me, year 14. And so those costs or your revenues level off, but you have things like you're going to have to repurchase police cars after every 4 or 5 years. I can't remember what the useful life was, we assume. But there are these capital items that are going to have to keep being purchased after build out, and those one-time revenues are gone.
Okay. All right, because I was looking at that and then knowing that's the time frame that, because it's 2025 is when it sunsets, and this occurs in 2026. So I said, okay, what is that?
Right.
All right, that explained that one for me. Anyone else?
Nope.
Your Honor, I just make a comment to say thank you, Carson. Thank you for the analysis. This helps us as we plan long-term revenues to expenditures. And then, of course, like the state government has asked of us, we will do a budget that's based on projected revenues and projected expenditures. We do not print money, we do not act like, and will never act like the federal government, and we'll produce a balanced budget. We will start to begin to see one-time revenue like we've never have had before. And before the recession, we used to always, and this will be something we'll work a lot on and talk with our community about, is one-time revenues need to connect with one-time expenditures. And we want budgetary discipline. So in our budget policies and our budget efforts, we will not start to get connected or having recurring expenditures tied to those. And so those are some of the things we need to be really smart about. So we'll bring those up during the budget process to make sure we're having good budget discipline.
Good.
Okay,
Carson, we'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you very
my
much.
pleasure. See you tomorrow night.
Yes, another one. Presentation discussions on proposed resolution number 22-04. Raquel.
Oh, boy.
More money, more money, more money.
Property tax.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. Raquel Schatz from the Public Works Department, here to discuss Amendment Number 2 of an ADOT IGA for the city's Old West Highway Sidewalk Project. Back in 2017, we were awarded through MAG $1.5 million for the construction to begin in 2022 through the Active Transportation Committee. 2019, we were awarded a funds for design in the amount of $417. That funds we received through closeout funds. 2021, we went to MAG for closeout funds for the construction because we were our match was more than the typical 5.7%. So we were successful in an award of additional of closeout funds, so that we are now at a 5.7% match. So far, the schedule is design is completed. Construction is anticipated to begin fall of 2022. So brief background of what the improvements look like since we were back here in 2020 for the first IGA with ADOT on this project. These are a sidewalk improvement project on Old West Highway from probably about Winchester to Goldfield Road. We also included that small portion on Winchester Road from Old West Highway to 6th Avenue. That's the portion in front of CAC that didn't get built per the agreement that we had back then. So we've got sidewalks and curb and gutter on both sides wherever it's missing along Old West Highway. Here's another picture close-up of what we're intending to do. There are some existing sidewalks out there. Some of them are detached and some of them are meandering. And then there's some other pictures where there's not existent sidewalks, which we'll go ahead and attach either if we can do detached and meandering, or if we have to attach it by the street. So back again to the CAC, when their campus was developed in 2011, this was a portion where the city and CAC, there was a 60-40 split, and we had came to an agreement that this portion here wasn't going to get installed with sidewalks until the CAC was going to develop in that portion of land there, which they still haven't yet. Probably about a year ago, I think, Bryant, we spoke to CAC and they agreed to pay the 5.7% of the sidewalks that's adjacent to their property here. Okay. And I say 5.7% because that's what we would get through the federal funds. So that would be our match.
Okay.
So here we go. That first column there is what the original IGA shows. You can see that our, let's see here. So originally we were paying $88,344, but our construction cost has almost doubled.
Yeah.
And that's because when we put in the application back in 2019, we didn't account for any drainage purposes, any drainage or anything else like that. So we are having to extend some box culverts. We're having to do some additional piping. We're having to do quite a bit more drainage work. So that was the reason for the huge increase in the construction cost. So now our offset is no longer a 50-50 match with federal funds and city local match. We are now closer to that 5.7%. So due to closeout, we have received an additional $1.5 million to do this construction project. Once again, we received closeout funds, so we need to execute IGA and pay the city local match prior to June 1st. This is on consent agenda for tomorrow evening. Are there any questions?
Yes?
I just have one. So this isn't going to start until fall of this year?
Correct.
Is it going to be done before the winter visitors come?
More than likely not.
Oh,
I know. And that's the kind of the risk we take when we go asking for closeout funds.
sure.
Just because of the June 1st deadline, we now have to go onto ADOT's schedule. They have to do the bid and advertisement, which takes a month. They have to award it, which takes another month. Nothing really gets started until the fall when we do these closeout projects. There's a slight possibility that if the project doesn't if it exceeds, or if for some reason they have to rebid it, we could start, but it'll probably be then a January 1st start date. So there's no really good time for construction here in the city. I
How
wish
long
there
will
was.
it last, Raquel?
Huh?
How long will the construction be? Or expected?
Right now, they're saying about 120 days, but it's sidewalk. I can't see it taking more than, between 90 and 100.
So no pressure, Al. Just got to keep them informed.
We are trying to avoid as much traffic as possible with the Renaissance Festival, knowing that that's going to be heavy traffic in March. So, yeah.
Yes?
Raquel, on page 4,
Uh-huh.
what's with the snake meandering sidewalks anyways? Did this just take your little highlighter and just draw a line, or is that the way it's going to be?
It's just kind of for aesthetics. It's kind of something that the city has established, just to kind of, just instead of the straight and narrow, the attached next to the street, to provide a little bit of a buffer for safety purposes. That's not really how it looks like when the design is completed. So there are some, because it's also due to the terrain out there as well too. It gradually goes down in some areas. We couldn't build a bridge to go over the wash. So that one does kind of go out a little bit, and then it does do a snake meandering, but.
Raquel, there is an example there of some of it that is completed, right? That's not
Correct.
yellow, but the gray there. And
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's
So
to
there
add
are some that are already,
variation and,
yeah,
for pedestrians and.
Yeah, I see that right there. It's
yeah,
Not so rigid.
correct. Correct. We
so
try to have it
orderly,
smoothed out as
not
much
so
as
clean.
possible.
Yeah.
So, any other questions?
Got any questions? No?
All right, well, my next one is very similar to this one.
Okay, go ahead. Continue on.
Let me find it.
2206.
Yep.
All right. There you go.
So this is for another amendment for Arizona, with the Arizona Department of Transportation for bicycle and pedestrian improvements on Idaho Road. It's Idaho Road between Superstition Boulevard and McKellips, which is our border with Pinal County up there in the north. So 2017, once again, we received funds through CMAQ for $851,000 for construction in 2021. MAG, then we went through MAG, the active transportation, and we were awarded $60,000 for design assistance. Design assistance only provides design up to 15%, which means the city has to provide to fund the rest of the design ourselves. So then we tried to go back in 2019 through MAG closeouts, and we were denied for the full design. And so the city paid the remainder portion for that design to complete the design. 2021, we went out to closeout funds, and we received an additional $342,000 for the increase in the construction cost estimate that was done during design. Current design schedule right now, we're at 95%. We have some right-of-way that we are cleaning up with Maricopa County Flood Control District. This is the area up there by Lost Dutchman and Idaho Road. And then the construction is anticipated to be about the same time as the Old West Highway. Although this one, I think, may go a little bit further out, maybe possibly even February 2023. And that's just because it's later. It's not as far as long as the Old West Highway sidewalks project is. So here are a couple cross-sections. We do intend to do the 3 lanes where we can of 12-foot lanes, and then put our 5-foot bike lanes, as well with streetlights in some areas. So we'll do streetlights where they're missing from Superstition to TP. In the section between TP and Foothills Street, we'll continue to do the 3 lanes. We're going to narrow them down a bit. That's where we have a little bit of issues with right-of-way, so we're trying to keep within the current right-of-way that we have right now, and still provide the bicycle lanes as well too. There'll be room for streetlights on one side, and that'll be the side across from the school, because the school already has streetlights on them. And then the bottom picture there is our last segment. It's Foothill Street to Lost Dutchman Boulevard, where we'll keep the current configuration of the 2 lanes. With 2 bicycle lanes. In this area here, I don't believe, we're only going to put sidewalks on the east side of the street. And that's just due to right-of-way, and the purpose of having it on both sides is, well, the east side of the street takes us to the park. So, all right, so this one isn't as big and wow as the previous one, where we are gaining about $346,000 here. And that, again, is just because of the increase in cost for the construction. So the cost of concrete went up, the cost of roadway improvements went up. I think the only thing that remained the same was probably paint. So amendment number 2, it shows the city's slight increase of $20,000, and that's our 5.7% match, bringing the new construction cost estimate, or construction cost to $1.2 million. And once again, our 5.7% is our local match is now closer to 5.7% than it was in before in the original IGA. This one, again, we received closeout funds, so MAG is sticking it to us, keeping us to that June 1st deadline to try to get this executed, the IGA executed, and payments sent for federal funds. This will be on agenda on consent tomorrow. Is there any questions?
Any questions? No? No?
All right, one more. Are you ready?
Yes?
All right.
We'll do
Have a big
22-07.
So this is another IGA amendment number 1 with ADOT for the city's Winchester Road project. It's a widening project from 29th Avenue to Southern Avenue. I came back here last year when we did our original IGA. So in 2020, the city was awarded $1.3 million for construction in 2023. This was through usage of the Pinal County Arterial Bridge Program. So these projects through Pinal County are typically capped at $1.4 million, which means we then have to go through the whole closeout process to fund the rest of it. Our design schedules anticipate to begin in 2022. This is the purpose of going through this amendment. Because we have changed the design budget slightly, and ADOT feels like we have to capture that picture. So we're hoping that typical duration of design is 18 to 24 months, but because this project was already started, it was a previous city project, it was a drainage project, and now it's a roadway project. ADOT has allowed us to use the on-call consultant that we used for our city project. to make this a roadway widening project and then still continue to gain the federal clearances that were needed for these projects. So construction is anticipated to begin in 2023, but more than likely, because the project hasn't started design, we are looking at a 2024 construction start. All right, so we are looking at our last segment of Winchester, south of Old West Highway. We first started the previous phase, phase one, when we did the CAC build out. That portion there was Old West Highway to 16th Avenue. About 2 years ago, we completed phase two, and that was doing 3 lanes, bicycle lanes, sidewalk, curb and gutter on both sides. And that portion there was Southern Avenue to 16th Avenue, which leaves us with this last little segment here of 29th Avenue to Southern Avenue. Currently, right now, it's 2 lanes. We're going to widen it to 3 lanes so that it matches up nicely at Southern Avenue, and we can make that intersection a little bit more safer for cars to go to properly turn through or to go through straight. Here's a couple of cross sections where you can see right down at 29th Avenue, it's already wide enough to do 3 lanes. But here, when we approach here, 26th Avenue, which is that first street, that is residential. It's a private residential drive. It's 2 lanes, so we can we can extend it out to 3 lanes, and we can add some more sidewalk in there where it's missing. And then we'll add a couple of streetlights that are also missing as well too. We're gonna light this baby up. And then our final stretch here takes us all the way to Southern Avenue. That picture's a little hard to see, but you can see that the red truck right there is actually trying to go straight through where the other lane is gonna make a left. So that alignment up there at Southern Avenue and Winchester does not line up. So with this project, we'll make it line up, making it a better safety project. Not to mention that we're also going to include storm drain. So we're going to cover up that nasty channel there on the side there, that dirt channel. We're going to put a big storm drain. We're going to connect into the previous storm drain that we did on Winchester Road from Southern to 16th Avenue. So ADOT says, well, we're going to allow you to use your city on-call that you used before. So we are not going to charge you the $320,000 that ADOT would pay their consultant to finish out the design. So ADOT's only going to charge the $30,000, which is their design review, which is typical because we need to go through the federal clearances since this is a federal funded project, which means the design is on the city. And so far, the existing consultant is relatively under. We're looking at $250,000 instead of that $320,000 that ADOT was going to charge the consultant to do it. And because this is an ADOT IGA, since the city's paying for the design ourselves, they wanted us to take it off of the IGA. So that's why we're here tonight, just to show that we're not paying the ADOT $320,000 fee for their design, and we're only paying them $30,000 for the review. All the other numbers remain the same. The match on the bottom and on the amendment number 1 column, it's a little less than the 50% share that we had shown previously in the original IGA, and it's only going to get better once we apply for closeout funds for this one. We need this one to be approved so that we can get the design started. So this will again come on consent agenda tomorrow night. Are there any questions?
Nope.
Nope. Oh, I like the idea of straightening out some of the roads in that area as well, because it is confusing.
Yep.
Thank you.
Not a problem. Have a good night.
Okay, and we're at the wonderful time I can now adjourn, so I'm going to adjourn. See you tomorrow night.